Hello, shalom and marhaban. You're listening to Yalla, the podcast which works to combat lies, confront misconceptions, and hopefully, if I've done my job, challenge you to think deeper about things. I'm Amie, your friendly neighborhood biblical resource writer, and I'm so happy you've chosen to spend some time with me today. All right, well, I am sitting here currently with a couple of amazing individuals who will go by Uncle and Auntie. And Uncle, I'm going to go ahead and give it away to you to introduce to everyone who it is you are.
Thank you, Amie. Well, we're glad to welcome you into our home. We have been married a long time, more than 50 years. We have lived in two places on the West Coast and two places in the Midwest throughout our life. Currently, we are teaching and training and mentoring persecuted pastors in Africa and Asia. That means that we only go to communist countries, Hindu, Buddhist, and Muslim countries. We've been doing that for 51 years. In the past, I was a pastor for nearly 40 years and now a field worker for the last 18 years. We do our trainings together, but sometimes because of finances, I go by myself and Auntie does not go with me. So that's our situation. And we're going 18 to 20 international trips a year.
Wow.
But now it's cut down to we're trying to do it about 10 to 12 a year.
Okay.
International trips.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. So you're well-traveled.
Well-traveled. 162 countries.
Wow. That's incredible. Well, I think you're the right person to interview for this then, huh? So one of the reasons that I really wanted to interview you in particular, unfortunately, I would say especially in the West, I think people have misconceptions or don't really understand what spiritual warfare is. You know, they might have an idea or they might think, as far as the spiritual, what I call the spiritual realm, well, that was in the Bible time. Or that's, something that's propagated by Hollywood, or it's not really something that's in effect right now. And just from previous conversations we've had and some of the things that we've shared, I know that, Uncle, you have quite a few stories in this area, similar to what I've gone through in the West. But I was wondering if you could speak particularly on some of these, give some examples for our listeners of things that you have experienced.
Well, what I'll share could be, some could interpret them as just simply strange things that happen, but how can you say that that's spiritual warfare? And I would probably agree with them. But then there's some other things because of the repetition that it has to be warfare. So I'll go into the things that have happened over and over again.
Okay.
And I'll start by doing it more from Auntie's point of view. I'm going to let her do some talking, and then I'll share more from the field. Why don't you talk some about what has happened when I am going and you are having to stay home, and what I hate to get into all this, but if I could just make one statement which sounds like I'm backtracking, which I am. We believe that the primary occupation of Satan is not in testing Christians like us. His primary occupation, according to the Bible, is in false religion. That is what he specializes in.
Yeah.
And so it's primarily going to be many of his demonic associates that are going to attack us. It isn't going to be an attack from Satan himself.
Absolutely.
Okay. Auntie, why don't you talk about what happens when I go on a trip and you're staying at home?
Let me first say that I believe the rest of the world outside of the U.S. is way more spiritual than we are. And I'm not saying they know the Lord, but they're just very aware of spiritual beings and activity, where Americans, kind of being at the top of the self-sufficient ladder, don't need God per se. They don't think in spiritual terms, whether they're believers or unbelievers. The spirit world doesn't come into their mind usually.
Absolutely. Yeah.
But the rest of the world, it's right in the front of their minds. In some countries that Uncle has gone to, I would call them darker countries, meaning the believer who has the light of Jesus in you shines. And in certain countries, there are only handfuls of these lights for the Lord. Most of the people are dark, and a dark culture has more warfare against the light trying to penetrate it. I'm not saying this very clearly, but when he goes to one country that's not as dark, let's say, it's just could be like a regular trip.
Yeah.
When he goes to another country that's very dark spiritually, there's all kinds of spiritual activity against him going. Number
Opposition,
one,
would you say?
opposition. The first trip that he went on, we had 2 little girls, and it was to a dark country. He went, we took him to the airport and dropped him off, and we were all in favor of him going. The church behind us was in favor of him going, supported, prayer, and I no sooner turned around from the airport parking, got on the freeway to head home, and the oldest daughter, they were like 2 and 4, the oldest daughter says, I'm itchy, and she just starts having this huge meltdown out of nothing. And I'm going, well, scratch where it itches. What?
Yeah.
No, it itches
No big
behind
deal.
my ear. It's itchy. And she's just like hyperventilating after 5 or 10 minutes. I pull off the freeway to see what in the world could be going on. And come to see, she has chicken pox.
Oh my goodness.
A temperamental child to begin with chicken pox. And I've just sent my husband out of country.
Yeah.
So we get home, and sure enough, the second little one comes down with chicken pox. I mean, we're talking the temperamental one, 104-degree fever.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm the new mom that hasn't experienced that before. I'm calling my parents saying, I need help.
Right.
He's gone for 2 weeks.
Yeah.
And I've got this by myself. I don't know what to do. And so that was my first introduction. By the time he got home from that country, everybody was fine and happy again. And I thought, you were just trying to undermine my...
Like Warfare 101, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
And I thought, well, maybe that's just a fluke that it happened that way. But
Yeah.
there have been time and time again to where something unusual would happen only during the time that he is in another country.
Right.
The first missions trip that I went on in the U.S., not going overseas, was when the daughter that Auntie just mentioned was only 6 months old. I kissed her goodbye, kissed our daughter goodbye, but then she felt kind of warm. And we took her temperature, and she was 105 and a half. What I wanted to do was stay home and not leave, but I didn't have that option.
Yeah.
Because I had 200 young people waiting for me, and we were all going to the airport. And I have this charter airplane, and I'm responsible for the whole plane.
Wow.
And so I couldn't just
you can do.
leave Auntie. I had to go. And so that was something that it took her a long time to forgive me.
Well, and how incredibly hard for both sides. I mean, literally, as you're about to leave. Oh my goodness. Okay.
The ultimate goal is, from our point of view, for any negative action towards our ministry has been an attempt to either stop Uncle from going to these places or hurting somebody that he loves,
Yeah.
that where he would come to the point of reconsider
Yeah.
not going wholeheartedly.
Right.
So,
Yeah. And I can bear witness to that because in my own encounters, particularly when I'm about to give my testimony and there's parts that are going to be very hyper spiritual, I mean, which we can go into, but inevitably someone is sick or I can't sleep or, I've had an hour of sleep for the last week or, things like that are just very health oriented, but they're almost like clockwork because it's any time I'm sharing this particular testimony. So I can, yeah, say amen to that.
while we were still in our first location, he took on a ministry in Asia that was very impactful for world missions, ultimately. But when he started going there, the first trip, we had just bought a new refrigerator and moved to a new location. And he left, and then within the day, I realized our refrigerator wasn't working. It wasn't cooling, and it was news.
The day that, wow.
So I called the repairman, you just delivered this. It was working just fine. And he came out and he looked it all over and he said, "There's nothing wrong with this." And I said, okay. It started cooling again while he was there. He leaves, and I'm home with now 3 kids at that point. Uncle's already left the country, and the next day it's not working. The food is all thawing. I called the man back. I said, "I've got the same issue. There must be something wrong with this refrigerator.
Yeah.
Can you
What is
replace
going on?"
it?" Or the same man comes back and looks. There's nothing I can see that's wrong with this. And so that ended up being the whole time he was gone to that Asian country.
Yeah.
When he came home, everything turned on and worked perfectly.
Yeah.
Years later, would go to that same South Asian country. The garage door repeatedly over a number of times would keep going up and down all during the night while I was gone. And then as soon as I came home, it stopped. And it would do that for a number of trips. And then when I would go to another East Asian country, she would try and drive my vehicle, which was a standard transmission, and she could never get it out of first gear. And there was never a problem with when I drove it. And so she had to drive it all the way to our repair guys in first gear. It took her forever. They got in the car and they drove it just fine. And they said, "What's the problem?" And she said, "Well, get in with me." And so he got in and she drove it. And she could not, no matter what she did, get it out of first gear. And it was always that way for a number of times. And it became so well known, they would always ask, is Uncle at such and such country right now?
It became an actual thing.
And she would say yes, and they would say, "Well, then that's what it is." And so those are the kinds of things. Sometimes they only happened once, but other times they happened repeatedly.
Yeah.
And those we would have to say would be spiritual warfare.
Well, and I'm actually glad, because I was just about to ask you that, because one thing I often share with people is, I think when people hear that things are happening and we tie them to spiritual warfare, they go, "Okay, were you just tired? Did you forget to plug it in?" Kind of those kind of questions, because they seem, on the surface, they can seem simple. But with my own testimony and things that I've noticed, you start distinguishing between things that are simple mistakes versus things that there's repetition there.
These frighten you when they're repeated.
Yeah, they're frightening. And, even things that even Hollywood will put in movies, I say there's a reason they use those things. If I'm about to give a talk or if I'm about to do something, your spirit can sense, the lights will start flickering. I'll have doors close and no one's there. Things of that nature that are repetitive. and you can tell, okay, the next day I'm going to go speak at such and such event. The next day I'm going to do something. Or, for whatever reason, I'll get up at 2 o'clock in the morning. I'll get up at 1. And so as you were sharing those things, Auntie, I was going, oh my goodness. It almost gave me chills because I went, these things happen and they're repetitive. It's repetitiveness.
Well, the incident with the car, we had used this older repairman for years. And it was a car that we had had for years. So he had repaired it. He knew us well. He's not a believer, but a very kind-hearted man. And so when I called him and said, my car won't shift, well, bring it in. I said, it'll go to first gear, but it won't go out of first gear. And I know this car. I've driven it for years. And he said, well, just do first gear, take all the back streets, and get to me. And he looked at it and he said, let me drive it. So I hopped in the passenger seat and he was driving. He would do it just fine. And he goes, I don't see any issue here. And I said, well, you know me, you know the car, you know we've had it. I said, wait a minute, you get in the passenger seat and let me drive it around the block. And I got it to first and it would not. And he was even trying to shift from the passenger seat. And he said, is your husband out of country? And I said, he is. And he said, I don't know why these things happen, but I believe you, and I believe it's not going to repair until he gets back home. So just leave it right here on my parking lot. Yeah. And we did.
So let's talk about that for a second. In your experience, because you've gone through this for years. I mean, we're not talking about 1 year. We're not talking about sporadically. So you have gone through it enough to recognize these patterns. Why do you think these are the ways that you're attacked in particular? Have you ever thought about that? Like, why do you think these particular things happen?
Because if he would have an occupation of a plumber or something in this house, I would say, would you stop being that? Let's go a different road. But because we're both committed to what he does abroad, there's fight against it.
Yeah, absolutely.
And if the evil forces can change my attitude or make it so hard for me that I'm whining for him to stay home, or
I think that's important for people to hear.
Yes.
What you think the reasoning is behind that. It's not just you wanting to say, oh, our lights are flickering, or there's a purpose.
And the kids have to pay the price as well.
Because of all that, I ultimately had it wasn't a mid-career crisis. Well, it was a mid-career crisis. I just wasn't sure I wanted to keep doing what I was doing.
Yeah.
And so I interviewed with an insurance company. I interviewed with a foundation overseas. Mm-hmm. I did a number of interviews. And then when it came down to it, I ultimately decided to keep doing what we were doing. But it caused me to have pause and to see is this still really what I want to be doing now? I'm going into my 40s. Yeah. I had done it in my 20s and 30s. Do I want to keep doing it in my 40s and 50s?
Yeah. Just for those of you listening right now, this is a very topic where we need to be very careful about names and regions. So we're going to speak in kind of general on air. Are there any examples that you have overseas of spiritual warfare where there was a demonic entity involved, or something that you can speak to as far as that goes?
The very first trip that Auntie and I did together when we were married was just 3 weeks after we were married. Mm-hmm. We went to a country in Africa. Mm-hmm. Today it is number 3 on the list of countries that persecute Christians.
Okay.
And so it's a very hardline Islamic state.
Okay.
And we prepared to go there, and the last week before we left, we were told now that we can't go because 2 of our nurses had been kidnapped, and one had been executed, and the other was being held for ransom. And so we were told that we had to go basically 1,000 miles further south, and we were just devastated.
Yeah.
Okay, all this was done by demon-possessed and demon-driven radicals who would do whatever they had to do to accomplish their ends.
Yeah.
When at the end of the time that and we were there for months, at the end of the time that we all left, we took a team of 8 to this country on our honeymoon, basically. When we left, the head of the country was put under house arrest and then executed. And for the next 17 years, the country became communist. And lots of bad things happened. The pastor I was working with was given electric shock treatments until he went insane. All the women were raped and killed. All the men I was worked with were either killed or they fled, or they were able to flee the country.
Was this did you hear about this when you came back? Or was this
after
while you were... Oh my goodness.
And so those kinds of things don't happen unless it's demon inspired. This is not. These are really bad things that people were doing to their own country, to their own countrymen. And so what that did, it was the first experience that we ever had as a married couple. And it gave us an understanding of the persecuted church that we never had before. And so we began to commit ourselves to work with the persecuted church for the rest of our lives. So what Satan was trying to do to thwart us and stop what was going on, it actually led to us having an even stronger commitment, and we've followed up on that, and we've lived that commitment for more than 50 years.
That's one of my favorite things to hear, because it's another important point where people go, with my story, they go, oh my goodness, what a horrible thing you went through. What a horrible experiences these were. I mean, it's just, I can't imagine. And I go, but on the flip side of that, how many people that I've been able to speak to who have come up to me and said, Amie, I can't share this with anyone. No one will believe me. Thank you for sharing your story. Or, I had thinking of one particular person actually in when we were living in California, whose child was dealing with possession. And she goes, I had no one to talk to. She goes, I've never heard someone's story that I felt like I could actually share with you, and you wouldn't think I was crazy. So when I tell people that, I go, what a blessing that I understand you're not crazy. These things happen, and that's a blessing.
And Amie, we thought we were going to have to go 1,000 miles to another location, and that was what our mission was telling us. But our plane made which was an international flight, made an unexpected stop in the very city that we were planning to work in all along. And all these soldiers came on the plane, and they asked for such and such young people to get off the plane. And so we had to gather all of our stuff together. We went down underneath the plane. They unloaded all the pieces of luggage on the tarmac. And they had us pick through all the luggage and find our luggage. And then they put all the luggage back on the plane. It took an hour to do this. And then the plane took off and left us with the soldiers there. We had no idea what was going on. And when we get to the airport, we find the missionary that we're going to be working with. We'd never met him before, and he said, well, I just disagreed with what Home Office told me to do, so I decided to disobey.
Wow.
And instead, I went to the control tower, and I told the guy who was operating it, because he was one I was discipling, I said, there's this plane going to be coming in. And he gave them all the information on the plane, and he said, you need to flag it down and get it down here. There's 8 young people on that plane that need to be here working with us in the north and not going into the south.
Wow. That's called divine intervention, if I've ever heard of it. Yeah, that's amazing. I love to tell people, the enemy knows who God is, and the enemy is afraid. The enemy, they are terrified of the name of Jesus, in my own experience, where it's, We're not concerned with who you are, flesh and blood, right? But when you call upon that name, and I want to make this point, not in an incantation way of where we just say, say Jesus 12 times and turn around.
A mindless repetition.
Yeah, like, I don't really know who he is, but when you call on that name and you speak on that relational authority that you have, they know, in my experiences, oh, you mean business. Okay, and that really has thwarted the enemy's plan.
I'm doing training in an African country, and I'm with my African associate, and he is a strong, faithful man. And he's in the middle of teaching, and there's, like 50 to 100, I don't know the exact number, pastors that are there. And in walks this little girl. She's probably 15, but and she just walks into the side of the church that we're meeting at, doesn't say anything, just kind of walks in, and he runs over and he throws her down on the ground, and he basically gets on top of her and starts saying Jesus and going after her. And he said, I knew as soon as she walked into the room that she was demon possessed, and that she was here for no good. And she didn't say anything, and he never met her before. And he just jumps right into the fray, and everybody starts all piling around, and she starts screaming, and the vile things are coming out, and it took a while for him to cast the demon out, and it definitely was more than just a 15-minute coffee break. It was a way to break up the meeting for a while, but it sure was a great teaching tool for everybody there. But I could not believe that he acted that quickly.
His spirit knew, spirit bear. That's almost a form of spirit bearing witness. Like, oh, there's something not good going down. Yeah. Did you have anything you wanted to add, Auntie?
Well, I just usually remind Americans especially, it's not just one or two for covering all the globe.
Yeah.
These are a lot of demons that are doing evil activity and trying to prevent the gospel.
Yeah.
And I can share this name because it's now passed. But the early workers that went into Afghanistan, they went in the 1960s, and they were there for about 12 years until 1972. And in all that time, not one convert came to the Lord. No one was saved. And the church that they had established ended up being bulldozed down by Muslims. And these were very well-known evangelicals. Ralph Winter was involved in it, and J. Christie Wilson, and many famous people that Auntie knew when she was a younger woman. And they found that there were so many demons in Afghanistan that if somebody tried to pray on their own, every single one felt that none of their prayers were getting above the roof. They weren't getting to God at all. And the only way that they could have an effective prayer time is they would have a circle, and everybody that was there in the country would all, because then they couldn't do this every night, they would all gather around and pray for one individual, and then that individual would pray. And that was the only way that they felt that their prayers could get up to heaven. Otherwise, they were just bombarded, things flying across the room, all the typical things that go on in haunted houses and stuff. All that was going on there, and that was their experience. And they finally they all leave in 1972. Not one convert. So then what happens? The Lord decides to intervene, and he has the Soviet Union. At that point, there was the Soviet Union. They invaded Afghanistan on the last week of the year 1979, and ultimately 5.5 million Afghanis were uprooted and had to leave the country. And most of them went into Pakistan, and there were giant refugee camps. The largest was Camp Yalla that had 85,000, and you could just see these pink tents all the way to the horizon. My son and I were in Camp Yalla, and people were able to hear the gospel, and thousands were coming to faith. And Amie, they were all coming to faith. And they could not have done that had they stayed in Afghanistan.
Wow.
The Lord had to drive them out of Afghanistan to another place and put them under severe testing. But to do that, thousands came to Christ.
Yeah. So here's a question.
Yay, God.
Yeah. Yay, God. Yes. Praise the Lord. With all of these situations and circumstances overseas that are happening, and then bringing it back to the West and the church in the West, and what I say sadly, how little we really understand. Where that's a neat story for over there. Meanwhile, what I say is, you sit with your Starbucks and you're in your comfy seat, and and you're learning, but you really don't get it. What are some things in particular can you think of that you think, man, I wish it would be nice for the church to know these things?
Our son is 12. He's very depressed. He can't afford Game Boy, and mom and dad can't afford to buy Game Boy for him. His best friend across the street moves away. His dog bites somebody and has to be given away. He ends up getting Lyme's disease and several other things, and he's critically ill all summer. He loses his entire summer, and tells all this to Auntie, her older brother, and he wisely says, "Well, all he knows is America. He doesn't see the bigger picture. Here's some money, and on the next trip that you go on, take him with you." She says, "Well, the next trip is going to South Asia." And he says, "Perfect, take him there." And so I take him there, and he gets to go see a whole part of the world he can't even believe, and see all these dead bodies floating in the river, see 40 or 50 feet high stacks of wood that are used to burn bodies.
Yeah.
And all the different gods and goddesses, and he comes back a totally transformed kid. From that point on, he was 180 opposite, going the other direction, and he's never changed since.
Yeah.
It had that kind of effect. So one of the things that I wish could happen is that everybody in America could just take 1-2 week trip to one of these hard places, and see the darkness, and see the hopelessness, and see the despair, and see all that, and see the demonic activity. And we went on our 10th wedding anniversary. We're in this Hindu village, and we can hear the demons. We could hear the demons all screaming throughout the village, and we heard that all night long. We had to sleep on a mattress on the ground, but also on the ground were lots of ants, and right above us was a big hornet's nest, and to use the outhouse, you had to take this big stick and whomp on it to get all the worms to go down so you could use it. And so we turned to each other and we said, who would have thought that 10 years ago when we got married that this is where we'd be spending our 10th anniversary.
10th anniversary. You mean not everyone would want to do that? Is that what you're telling me? So when you're going through this and you're, hearing these screeches and you're in these really dark areas, maybe people out there are going, why would you keep doing this? Like, what's wrong with you? Only a mental person, right? Like, why are you why would you spend your 10-year anniversary in a place like that? What would you tell people?
Well, here's what I would tell them. In a half hour, I could help somebody become a social scientist. And here's what I would have them do. I would have them do, first of all, research and find out what countries have the poorest standard of living. Take the bottom 20 out of the 200 plus countries. Where are the very poorest countries in the world? And then they might have to have some help from a Christian friend, but also find out what countries have the least percentage of Christians in their population. And you know what they're going to find? Exactly the same number. Because the places where the people are the poorest is also where there are the fewest Christians. Because what God does, He's committed to bless those who follow Him and love Him. And He does give a physical and spiritual blessing to millions of people. But many of them don't have that blessing, and because of that, they're poor to the bone. And so, why do we keep going to these places? Because we go where the need is the greatest. We go to the most needy, to the ones who are overlooked, to the ones who are lost, to the ones who are last, to the ones that nobody else cares about. That's why we do what we do.
Yeah. Did you want to add something, Auntie?
Yes, and then we share the gift of the Lord Jesus Christ and salvation, that they don't have to stay in their darkness. We share the good news of the gospel, that God has prepared a way for us to follow Him, to obey Him, to choose Him, and leave our wickedness, our sinfulness, and fall under the umbrella of God's blessing.
Yeah.
And we've seen that, I'm thinking, with the Kurdish people in Lebanon that have done 180 degrees difference because of the gospel and the social uplift that happens when people give their lives to the Lord, and there's a blessing.
You can read about it. There are hundreds and hundreds of articles that chronicle this. It's called social uplift, and social uplift occurs when a vast number of people all become believers in a short amount of time, and they then begin. In the next generation, they produce their own lawyers, their own doctors, their own teachers, their own businessmen, their own. They figure out how to get water. They figure out how to get all these kinds of things. It just naturally, no pun intended, it naturally flows. Whereas what we oftentimes do, we put Band-Aids on stuff. Yeah. We get a bunch of college kids together, they go somewhere and they go dig a well. Right. And they feel really good about themselves because we gave this village a well. But that didn't help. That didn't help the 1,000 other villages that need a well too. Yeah. And so what these people need is they need thousands of people all coming together and coming under the lordship and authority of Jesus, and who's there to bless them, and all kinds of great things happen when that takes place. And that's what's needed.
So really, if we could instill that value into the youth, into this idea of not not just maybe a week mission trip, or kind of what you're speaking to, where, oh, we're visiting an orphanage, which in and of itself, it's a wonderful thing. But then
But it doesn't do anything.
but it doesn't do
long-term.
anything long term. Yeah, exactly. In my view, I always, I poke fun at this, but I say, again, in the Western church, we're upset. Our day is ruined if our favorite coffee shop or our favorite shoe shop is been shut down and moved across town. We're like, well, how dare you? Because that's our cross to bear. That's how we treat it. Like, that's just, it's so hard for us. And yeah. Did you have anything you wanted to
I
add?
was going to share when our son was 12 and had all these negative things. 4 major things happened that summer. One of those trips was when he went with Uncle to Pakistan and saw all these plastic tents that the UN gives people to live in. And it was so cold. They had hundreds of babies every night dying because they froze to death.
Yeah.
He couldn't believe that. And we were in an area of the country where we happened to know the man who started Feed My Starving Children ministry.
Good friend.
So he came home and he went to that man and he said, we've got to help those refugees. I thought refugees were like criminals. He said these were wonderful business people, good quality families that just had to become refugees.
Yeah.
So the man said, yes, you can go ahead and I'll provide all the grains and things that you need. It'll be your responsibility to get all your friends together and do the packing. And when we get, I forget,
2 million meals.
2 million meals, then I'll have it shipped over there and it will help them.
Yeah.
And so our son said, well, I'm going to do this. He collected his friends, he made fun events out of it, and they packed 2 million meals.
Oh my goodness. And he did it.
So that was just before 9/11 happened. And then he was beginning to pack the meals and 9/11 happened. But it took going out of his culture to really see the vision, to see where people are at, what you could do about it, and come home and do something. He was on television, he was on the news, he was like, all that led to him going into a political science career, getting a full scholarship at a college, from there going to be an intern at the White House, from there now with the State Department going to Kazakhstan next year. So
that's amazing. All from that experience.
yes,
Yeah.
but you don't think Americans usually don't dream big enough for their children. They're our future. They need to have these experiences.
One life-changing event can lead to another, can lead then to another, can lead to another. That's what we've seen happen repeatedly with people.
Yeah. Well, that's really the prayer too for the next generation. I see this mentality right now. We've talked about this in previous podcasts, but I'll reiterate, where narcissism has always been in effect, right? That's not a new concept, but how I think so much with partly with the advent of social media, partly with the advent of propaganda, and how readily available some of that is, we have become very complacent. We have become very inward thinking, and not thinking about the persecuted church, or those in third world countries, or people who are really suffering. And so that's what I wanted them to hear is, these things are taking place. This is not just, something you're seeing on the news, but there are people going out and experiencing these things. I want to thank you so much for taking time out of your day and just coming on the podcast and sharing these things with everyone. So
Thank you, Amie.
Thank you.
well, that concludes the interview with Uncle and Auntie, and I hope you enjoyed it and it was educational and gave you some insight into the persecuted church and missionaries and what they go through. I know personally we spoke for a couple hours, and some of the insights that were given were truly, truly remarkable, from places where people are overnight taken from their homes and placed in camps, fathers who are removed from their families because they are Christians, because they are following Christ, and transported to different countries. Hardships that the majority of us in the West just can't fathom. Really, things that would really just tear us apart and challenge our faith. And yet, I saw pictures of women who have endured the hardest realities, smiling and cooking together and singing praises, and really was a reminder to me that joy is not only connected to happiness. Joy can be found in the Lord. That is our hope of joy, even through hardships, even through tears and crying and battles, that our joy ultimately doesn't come from our circumstances, it comes from above. And what an astounding message that is in times such as these. So that wraps up our time together. And as always, know that you have value. We're created for a unique purpose and are deeply, deeply loved by God. Ma'asalem, velitrot, we'll chat soon.